in a true capitalist approach, I want to rebuild my asset base. I've got a daily income of sunshine. I need to rebuild my asset base and learn to live off what that asset base can sustainably yield.
Today, we're diving into that idea of rebuilding the asset base, what it really means, how it applies to grazing, and why thinking of sunlight as income might change how you manage your land. Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, where grass farmers help grass farmers. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. Calling all ranchers, if you're looking for a better way to optimize your grazing operation and rev up your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. Noble's team of ranch managers and researchers work together to find solutions to your challenges. They don't just give you the answers. They help you understand how to apply the research-tested and field-proven principles on your ranch. Visit noble.org and click the Find a Course button for information about online and in-person educational courses near you. For 10 seconds about the podcast, the Famous Four Vault is live for insiders at grazinggrass.com. That's access to over 200 episodes of Famous Four Answers. Chris, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited to have you on today, all the way from Australia. To get started, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Thank you, Cal, for having me on. We're situated in northern WA, northern Western Australia, and our closest town is 120 kilometers away. We don't have road access, so we fly. Our capital city for the state is 2,500 kilometers away. And my background is I was a farm boy born and raised in Southern Africa, and I finished my high school in Europe. And by the time I finished high school, the civil war in Rhodesia was all but over, and I no longer had a country to fight for or a farm to go back to. So I kept going, looking for a place to sink my roots in. And travels took me to Australia in 1979. It didn't take me long to realize that there was a lot of opportunity here. So I'm in a similar latitude to where I grew up in. And growing up in southern Rhodesia, I was sensitized to two things primarily. One was land hunger, and that is growing populations and desertifying country, but also water security. We only had one borehole, and then later a second borehole, but all our creeks were very seasonal. Dad did put in a little dam, so we had some irrigation in the later years. But water security, I was very sensitized to water security. And then I came to Australia and worked my way across the north from east to west, and water security also was an issue. And I still remember one of my bosses told me to climb up a windmill and turn the thing because the cattle down the bottom weren't getting water. There wasn't any wind. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. Also, as I was traveling around, I'd read stories about the pioneers in Northern Australia, and I soon came to the realization that Australia is a very harsh environment, and if all your assets are in one agricultural unit and it doesn't rain for 5 years, you have a problem. So my approach was I want to be able to subsidize my operation with off-farm income, and I want to have some sort of water security. And I finally found that got to the Kimberley after about 5 years, and we came across flowing water all year round. And I thought, well, that's not too bad. The soils were very leached out. Well, there was about hardly any soil, mainly rock and gorges and that, but there were a few little illegal flats, but they were leached out. But it was really a desert with flowing water. And we didn't have the money to get into something that was already up and running. But my line of thinking was, well, we've got sunshine, we've got water, we've got parent material, the rest's management. And I thought that I could compensate for lack of local knowledge and lack of experience with a bit of perseverance and applying uncommon good sense. And it's taken me a whole lot longer, but I can confident than I originally hoped for, but I can confidently state the design that built the wealth that this planet produced and humans have been tapping into for millennia. That design is a good design. And all those processes that built the wealth that was here, like where I am now, used to be tropical rainforest. That was gone long before white settlers arrived. There were still bits of rainforest in the valley bases, but those processes that built all that natural wealth are still around. And the challenge in our situation is to reactivate those processes and start rebuilding that wealth. And in a true capitalist approach, I want to rebuild my asset base. I've got a daily income of sunshine. I need to rebuild my asset base and learn to live off what that asset base can sustainably yield. So, we get somewhere between, 400 to 1,200 millimeters of rain that drops out of the sky in each season. And we got 12 hours of sunshine on average. So, there's no excuse to give up hope. And we began with a small area. We still only have a small area, but I've been very encouraged. And I can say now that I'm I'm trying to hand over the reins of the foundations for a pastoral enterprise. Whereas when we first got here, there's no way you could have run a pastoral enterprise. So we built it. We had the water, and now we're building the soil. So it's the approach that I'm taking, and I think this aligns with a lot of your listeners, is stockmanship, grass farming, soil building. So the key is changing the behavior of the large animals. In this case, it's the formerly feral cattle, formerly feral donkeys, and the native fauna, marsupials mainly, changing their behavior so that they become what they were designed to do, be nature's gardeners in a savanna system, where they mulch, evenly fertilize, and prune vegetation. And that we start getting ground cover, water starts infiltrating. We get these tropical storms, which are like pressure cleaners. If the soil's bare, it's just like a pressure cleaner, and it just washes everything that's loose away. And whereas if you get the mulch there, we're changing these tropical raindrops from bombshells into mist irrigators, and having the soil cover there to hang on to that water. So the challenge is to hang on to a little bit more water, a little bit longer every year, so we can just increase the solar intake.
Yeah.
That's in a nut.
That goal is so universal with the people I talk to. We want to increase that infiltration, not let so much water run to our neighbors. But you mentioned two things there. First, you mentioned just this small area. How big of an area are you working with?
All right. I've got the whole property is about the size of Singapore. That's 77,500 hectares, about 180,000 acres. But I'm only using a small area. It's about a square kilometer where I've got tight management, and then the rest. Yep. I'm managing indirectly. We don't, we haven't got the funds to do a whole of property approach. And quite the other reality is, which we found out, is that at the moment it's not politically safe to have a whole of property approach, because I'm a bit of a heretic, because I'm actually, as a new Australian, I'm saying, well, new Australian ideas, people, animals, plants could be part of the solution rather than be framed as part of the problem. And I'm using hard-hoofed animals or herd animals, introduced new Australian animals, new Australian megafauna, I call them, to behave as their wild ancestors would have behaved prior to domestication, with their role as gardeners. Yeah. And that is not politically correct at this stage, but hopefully we can get more scientists to come and analyze our work and get that notion out there that we actually need to look at innovating and finding new solutions.
Yeah, hopefully so. You said early on that used to be a tropical rainforest. And when you got there, you had sunlight and running water, but not much else. What happened to take it from that tropical rainforest to the property you saw when you went there?
I can only put a picture together after a lot of reading and spending a lot of time walking through the country and watching how the country responds to fire. What I believe is the consensus at the scientific level is that very shortly after humans first arrived on this continent many thousands of years ago, Australia lost 95% of its large animal species. Most of those were herbivores. So if the role of herbivores, the functional role of herbivores is to maintain plant health. And in the absence of those herbivores, what the annual production, the annual growth, new growth every year couldn't be incorporated into the soil. So the people who were here for thousands of years, what couldn't be biologically recycled each year had to be exhausted into the atmosphere. So fire became a proxy to keep healthy what was around. So and the remaining marsupials or remaining megafauna. And
was fire used as a management tool and started by humans, or was it more natural?
I can't give you a conclusive answer to that, but I can give you my thinking, and that is human-lit fire certainly was new to Australia. So when nature lights a fire, it's lightning strikes, spontaneous combustion, or meteorite comes in, or a rockfall. But generally, the lightning strikes, they come when there's humidity in the air. And the other thing is, if you've got a functional environment and healthy vegetation, a fire started by a lightning strike will go out that night.
Right.
Because you've got your microclimate and everything, and the vegetation, if it's healthy, won't burn as readily. It's like you stop mowing your lawn and stop watering it. Well, you stop mowing your lawn, it'll keep growing, and then stop watering it. Well, then it'll just become senescent. And if it's already matured and becomes senescent, well, you end up with straw or wood, and it's all heavily aerated, and then the fire comes through, it's going to do so much more damage. So the less healthy the plants are, the more damaging the wildfire is. And so fire would have definitely been a tool. Well, coming from Africa, fire is a tool for hunting. Fire is a tool to clear an area where you want to camp. Fire will also get rid of nasties, but fire also makes it easy to go through country. If it's burnt, you can track easier. Yeah. But at the Australian context, when the first humans arrived here, apparently we had land crocodiles. You had lizards the size of crocodiles. We had a python that apparently had a girth of about a foot. So the first humans who came here would have, they would have realized no one's been here. And as a hunter, or you look around where the tracks, a mammal, a marsupial lion, or a tiger, wherever, they'll get up and have a stretch once a day or twice a day and leave their marks. Whereas one of these big reptiles, if they've had a belly full of heat, they don't have to move for 6 weeks. But then when they do move, they can move at lightning pace. And I suspect that if I was one of the first humans to arrive here at the moment, one of my party would have been taken by one of those dragons. I would have used fire as a life insurance policy around my camps day and night. Yeah. So just to protect myself. And we do that in Africa now still. A few years ago, I was privileged to join Alan Savory and a few of our friends on a horse riding tour on the edge of the Serengeti to watch the wildebeest migration. And every night the horses were tied up and there were fires around the horses to protect the horses from lions. So fire as a protective measure is still used today. So to think back of Australia, a continent that had seasonal fluctuations, and all of a sudden you get humans come in and they start lighting fires, not only for hunting, but actually to clear land. The impact of human-lit fire in Australia would have been phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly by the time European settlement came to Australia, in our area, there were no more rainforests on the ranges. We still had, in the valley bases, we still had tons of rainforest. By the time I came here, they were gone as well. There were a few little isolated patches which were sort of trying to revive and learn from. So yes, it's a human-lit fire is probably the biggest impact on taking down our productivity on this continent.
Yes. When you got there, when you went to Australia, had you already heard of Alan's savory and holistic management?
I had, but probably not in the way that Alan would like it. I still remember Dad banging his fist on that table. That bloody savory, he's going and shooting those elephants. And so Dad was a conservationist, and Dad cut his teeth in as a young man in Kenya, where he observed the value of the herds. So the mulching, pruning, and fertilizing, mulching, in fertilizing and pruning of the herds was something that he picked up there. And when he came to our little farm in Rhodesia, which wasn't a very productive area, he was using his animals in high density, low duration to do precisely that. And Dad was winning conservation trophies, but he wasn't making money with cattle. And those people winning cattle trophies with their cattle weren't winning conservation trophies. So back then was still, Alan was doing his thing, and we did. The missing links were still missing, and it was only after I finished school in Switzerland, and then we'd sort of lost the farm in Rhodesia, and I came to Australia, and I found out about Alan in 1996. And when I saw the missing links, I thought, wow, well, that's it. So fortunately, Alan kept going. Was Dad and I went to Europe, to Switzerland, and then it was totally, our rangeland knowledge was irrelevant there. But coming back to Australia, and then the challenge of Kachana, I realized, so on Kachana, I started doing what Dad was doing. Dad solved his dilemma in Rhodesia by incorporating photographic safaris to subsidize his land care efforts. And I thought, well, that's not a bad model. And I was using real estate and the idea of subsidizing with tourism, which is still on the drawing board. But to do that, because it just the farmer in me rebels. I don't want to be extracting more than country can sustainably yield. So I was aware that our industry was highly extractive and it wasn't sustainable over time. So I was looking for nature's solutions, and so Alan's work came just in time. They say when the student's ready, the teacher appears. So Alan appeared at the right time for me.
Oh, yeah. But that also means you were exposed to high density grazing as a kid.
Yeah. I call myself a second generation high density, low duration grazer. And my children are third generation. So actually it's a very exciting time now for young people, because when I started here, we still had these various schools of thought. You had the savory, the Stan Parsons, you had biodynamic, you had the permaculture people, and you had your various gurus, and gurus attract followers. They don't attract leaders, and so there was like a discipleship in these various followings, and the gurus they were being attacked from all sides anyway, so they had to they were on the defensive in a lot of cases. But 40 years later, or now close to 40 years later, well, what these guys can still proclaim is, it's passed the scientific test, and it's worth listening to. And we've got this second generation that are cross-fertilizing ideas. So we no longer have that religious-like segregation of these schools of thought. So we're all in the regenerative movement together, and a lot of hybridizing happening. So it's a very exciting time for young people in agriculture, I find.
Right. And combine that with the amount of information out there now. It's just amazing if you're getting started at this point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're talking about podcasts. It's the same thing with conferences. Now you go to conferences, you can't keep up. Well, I can't keep up with all the conferences. And when you go to a conference, all of a sudden you come across these like-minded farmers doing similar things, and they talk about their mentors who you've never heard about. So once again, It confirms that the family's there. It's a book that I highly recommend is written by Dan Daggett, one of your countrymen, called The Gardeners of Eden, our importance to nature. And he talks about the lost tribers, the lost tribe. Those are the people who try to live with the land in line with how nature works. And it's a great book. And so there's a lot of people out there, and it's this medium and modern technology and these conversations that have been happening these last 4 decades now, is allowing the tribe to get together and to compare notes. And we are an absolute minority who are trying to not only feed people, but actually rebuild the productivity that has been lost over generations in Australia over millennia. So it's...
Yeah, I agree. And, there's podcasts out there, but there's books, YouTube. YouTube's got so much information on it. Just the access to people like us. You're in Australia and I'm in Oklahoma, and we're carrying on this conversation. We just happen to record it and share it. So it's amazing.
No, it is good. So I met another, earlier on when you're talking about the rain, a guy from Mexico, not far from where you are, Alejandro.
Yes.
Carrillo. He's got the great statement, don't pray for rain if you don't know what to do with it.
Yes.
Alejandro, yeah. Once again, I only met him through this technology. All of a sudden we realized, hang on, we're kindred spirits. He's also working with donkeys, right? He's using domesticated donkeys. I'm using wild donkeys, but we're harnessing the function of this animal and working with nature. And when next thing we're able to compare notes, and yeah, it's great when you don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. You can learn off other people's mistakes and avoid them. And it's so good.
It is. When you first got to Kachana actually means far away. It's a Southern African Esperanto. It means far away. So if you're in Southern Africa somewhere and you say Kachana, they're far away. Oh yeah.
And it's a name that became, it took Dad and I in '85 when we first explored it. It took us 3 days of forward driving to get in here. And then we only got here. The rest we had to do. We then spent months just walking every day, getting to know the country. So we call it Kachana because it's remote, but it's remote by choice.
Yeah. Well, when your dad and you were introduced to Kachana, what visions did you have for it?
At this time, I was in a business partnership with my brother and another very good close friend of mine, and we were looking for some rural enterprise that would support 3 families. And Dad just came along. Dad was based in Switzerland and needed a bit of R&R after an operation. I said, "Well, come along with me. I want to explore this place, and I certainly want your rangeland knowledge." So Dad and I just did this exploration, and I'd flown over it a few months earlier in May, and I saw all that water, and I said, well, I want to. The owner at the time was part of a bigger property, and the owner hadn't been here, and he was looking at selling part of the property, and I said, well, that it's not what I was after, because I was looking for grazing country, but I saw that water. I said, well, I want to see that country in September when it's at its most vulnerable. So Dad and I went out and spent 4 weeks here in September 1985, just walking around, just checking out every water source. And we both came to the same conclusion: it's not cattle country, but that water is valuable, and the potential of subsidizing our work with tourism, was obvious, and that is still, for those who take up the reins after me, that is a great option that they can subsidize, have a tourist enterprise as well to subsidize their work. Because I think that the idea of tourism appeals to me, especially because it's a way of bridging the city-country divide. Educational tourism, we've got to get this message out to our city people. It's a hard ask. It's a hard ask to say we want good food and we want you to just, undo the damage of our ancestors at the same time. So I'm saying, the people who specialized in extractive farming now, they're good at that. Keep on extracting, just try and minimize your contamination or whatever, but just let us regenerators, let us get on with the job of regenerating the country.
Yeah, and the tourism, like you said, bring the public in so they can see what's happening.
Yeah.
So when did you introduce grazing animals, or were they already there and you had to do something with them?
So when we arrived, there would have been about 1,200 head of feral cattle, 80% bulls, and 400 feral donkeys. And in line with the wisdom of the day, we did a major destock. The country was bare, and we put it down to too many animals. Well, the departments did. I wasn't. I was skeptical, but I thought, well, I haven't got enough money to. I haven't got the funds to do a whole of property approach anyway. Let's do that major destock, keep everybody happy, and I'll just start with a nucleus herd of about 50. So these animals hadn't seen human beings till we arrived. So they'd been separated for generations. So the cattle would have been strays from old stock route days when animals were driven up to Wyndham to the meatworks, and an animal goes lame or a cow has a calf or whatever. And so there were these little isolated pockets of feral animals, and the donkeys after World War One. Well, their whole industry collapsed in the two world wars anyway. But then after World War One, mechanization started coming to this area. So the Afghan cameleers who also had donkeys, and they did all the transport stuff. Well, they got into the mechanized transport, and they let their mates go. They didn't. And then for a donkey, survival is a part-time job. So their numbers built up as well. So yeah, so we did the major destock, and then I got a small nucleus herd. Well, I started off with 19 animals that I started training up, and then this was in '93. We started working on the animals. Oh, I started working on before. So what I'd do is if I saw animals and they ran, I just stopped. Like this was prior to Bud Williams and all that. I didn't have all that knowledge, but I realized, these are herbivores. The last thing I want these animals is to have an impression of me being a predator or chasing them. So if they ran, I stopped. And then the next stage was actually if I could slow them down, I'd slow them down. And it got to the stage where I could walk through or even with a motorbike, go through a mob, and they wouldn't even get up. And and single balls and that I would just drop, not a problem. But then we still had too many bulls, and so I'd take animals out of the herd. So I'd if there's a bull that I had to get rid of, I'd dry it up. I'd sit under a tree, watch them for 20 minutes, and I'd just drop him. They'd scatter a bit, like a thunderclap, and then one falls down, and then but they didn't associate me with predation.
Oh yes.
So it was very important for me that they didn't associate vehicles or humans with predation, but they did sense that they were being predated on. So the behavior started changing very quickly, and they started we got rid of the isolated bulls anyway. We started getting the family groups started getting closer and bigger. And we got the development of little bachelor groups as well. So it was interesting. We got the same behavior that we had in Africa with our wild herds. And so by '96, I found out about Savory through RCS. That's Terry McCosker, the student of Stan Parsons, who did the RCS Grazing for Profit schools. So that's when I officially realized, hang on, we do need more mouths and more hooves, not less. By that time, we'd already done the major destock. We'd already got rid of 8,500 head of cattle, and we'd already shot half our donkeys. So we're down to about 200 head of donkeys. So then I approached the department. I said, well, listen, have a look at the donkey shooters next time they did their run. I said, come and have a look at what we're doing here with our cattle. And I showed them how with high density, low duration, we're starting to grow soil and getting better productivity. And I said, we need more mouths and more hooves. We've still got the donkeys. It may be a bad idea to get rid of these donkeys. Maybe we can use them where the cattle won't readily go to. And so in '92, I had that conversation. The helicopter pilot as well as the shooter were both farm boys from Queensland, so it made sense to them. And then so at a local level, departments were on board with this experiment. So we established a no shoot zone in a valley between two gorges. We set a no shoot zone, and they still went and did everything else. And in that no shoot zone, over the years, we started working with the donkeys. In fact, the dad, once he'd sort of retired, he came over and every year and started working with the donkeys on horseback. And yeah, we got the donkeys to actually complement the cattle for their mulching, fertilizing, and pruning. And they'd go up into the range. So we've got some pretty formidable ranges, and where certainly cattle don't readily go up. And that donkeys would go up there, and they'd also create pads. So if there's a wildfire, you could backburn off a donkey pad. It just became very useful to have that other species there that complemented the cattle. But then interesting, I like Alejandro's, he calls the donkeys his cover crop. So just like in agriculture, where all of a sudden you've got your main cash crop, but then you put in cover crops because it's a win-win-win. Right. He says, well, add the species. So he's using donkeys as a cover crop, and that's and I was once going back to Dad in Africa again. Dad reintroduced locally extinct species on our farm. So he reintroduced eland impala first, then eland, and then zebra. And once again, complementing that with his cattle work, it was fascinating to see how the country responded. Unfortunately, Dad's experiment was cut short through politics. But I'd seen enough to be convinced there was something there. And then, when the Savory thinking came along, and then so the Savory thinking just confirmed my theories about the macro herds. And then when Elaine Ingham came along and understood, hang on, we've got micro herds underneath our feet, and we can actually use the macro herds and the micro herds to supercharge each other. That's when I realized, wow, we haven't even scratched the surface. And then come 2013, I met Fred Provenza, and then I realized, hang on, the behavioral aspects, these things could be doing it on their own. We don't even have to.
Oh, yeah.
We don't, so that's what I'm saying is, we're all students at this. We keep on learning. There's just so much that we don't know. And I just hope we can be in this together. Certainly us on the land comparing notes, but that we can get the city people to support us and the regulators to support us and in this learning, and that, regulation can be updated as well. But I think the biggest opportunity, I'm not sure about the areas where most of your influence is, but certainly where we are here, I'm saying a good food story can be eclipsed by a bad water story. You can have the best regenerative farm if the country or farming area, if the rest of the area is desertifying where most of the water falls, you have a problem. And if we want to address the water story as a society, we have to think beyond farm boundaries, beyond catchments.
Yes.
We have to look at the bigger picture. So we also have to understand that the only tool at our disposal is what's already been proven in the industry, and that is using animals. I mean, the only tool that's feasible over landscape levels. So we've already got the people, the skills, the tools. Can we take the grazing industry or the grazing to take the pastoral thinking out of the broader landscapes to manage the health of our national parks and our water reserves and all that sort of stuff. So it is a politically challenging question, but it's really about the survival of our grandchildren.
Oh, it is. Yeah. As we look forward, how are we leaving this for them, and what are they going to have to work with? And you bring up a good point. You have a fairly big area compared to, well, most areas. That's almost 200,000 acres.
Yeah.
What the largest ranch in the United States is 800 to 1 million. King Ranch is somewhere up there. So there's some bigger ones, but they're few and far between.
At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com.
Most of us are working with smaller acreage, so we've got to reach across the fence and work together. Do you have any insights on how to do that better?
So I will quote one of my mentors, Alan Savory, who said somewhere, farms need to get smaller, ranches need to get bigger. I will paraphrase that and say, nutrient production needs to intensify, landscape management needs to extensify. And I think if we start looking at landscapes and we do need, it is a great opportunity for people to get together and put larger herds together or manage them just extensively, but for common good, for common advantage. It's the challenges are social, not environmental. From an ecological point of view, it's patently simple. We've just got to recreate the functions that were there before we sort of upset everything. So we can't, and as Alejandro pointed out, if every rancher in the States wanted to start grazing his animals like that, we wouldn't have enough cattle to process to keep everything, the whole landscape healthy. We've really got to start exploring out of the box, and that's where once again we've got to start having it's like with the enterprise analysis. If you've got an operation, you've got your breeder operation, you've got a fattening operation, you've got a real estate operation. I'm saying is that the landscape rehabilitation is a different enterprise to breeding, and to be valued as such. The landscape rebuilding has to be looked as a different enterprise to primary production. It's wealth creation for the nation, or rebuilding ecological foundations. So water security and landscape productivity has to be something, and that has to be incentivized. And we need the people working together, and we need to be keeping each other honest and learning. And there's going to be no one size fits all. This is the thing is, each of us, every paddock's different. So every property is different. And then each family, each context is different. So the one size fits all thinking that is so convenient for regulators just does not apply. It's bad enough in the production situation. It's impossible if at the landscape level, if we want to sort of waterproof our cities, provide water security for our cities. So that's where the thinking of extensively managing our landscapes and pooling our tools and thinking and coming up with innovative ways, and there'll be different ones. So that's the best they can offer at this stage.
I want to move two directions, Chris. I want to come back to your cattle and talk about them some. But first, you mentioned a one-size-fits-all there approach, and you were able to get some concessions that they weren't going to shoot the donkeys in one valley there. How has that journey gone with your donkeys?
Well, that journey was going very well until 2000, and every now and then there was a change of the guards. It's locally, and invite them in. We show them what we're doing, and we were hoping that people higher up in the departments and in the ivory towers, 2,500 kilometers away, would come behind us. But then at the local level, there was a change of guards, and someone just, no, these animals are a pest and they have to be annihilated. I'm saying, man, we can use it as part of the solution. And even so, if you really believe that replacing herbivores with fire is a good thing, well, let's have a discussion. Let's have an informed discussion, let's get the research in, and let's compare notes. Let's not just abandon an experiment or a demonstration simply on your personal belief that these lead is better than what these animals are doing. Because what we'd noticed is I could have brought that in earlier, but I forgot. But when we did the major destock, we started getting a fire problem.
Oh, yes.
We ended up with massive wildfires every 3 years. And so now we're in a position where either you have a wildfire every 3 years, or a third of what you grow each year, you've got to exhaust into the atmosphere. So we're back. In a way, we are revisiting the experiment that the first humans did in Australia when they lost the megafauna, where they had to work out, how do we manage fire so we can survive? And, well, Aboriginals did an admirable job to survive for millennia in the absence of these large herbivores. But Aboriginal Australia supported 500,000, 2 million, maybe even if it was 4 million people. We've got 28 million people now, and we're exporting nutrients to another 60 to 80 million people offshore. We're not talking high school maths here. We've got to bring in more energy if we want to extract nutrients to feed all these people. So, and we know that nature had that abundance. Let's do that. So back to the donkey issue, is I'm just saying to the departments, come on, let's study this and see what's going on. And at where we are right now is after an eight years of confrontation and me saying, well, look, you shoot them. I'm not going to stand in the way of bullets. We finally, well, we're back to where they still want to shoot them, the regulators. But fortunately, we got a bit of publicity there through the Australian media, and people are aware of the conversation. And we're trying to say, well, let's work together. I mean, I don't have a problem with regulators. Regulation is important, and regulation by nature is top down. You have to regulate industry. You have to regulate, that number of humans. But regulation needs to be in line with how the natural world works. And us farmers, we work in situations that are bottom up. So growth, production, regeneration begins at a cellular level. It's a bottom-up process. So our regulators need to be working with us and ensuring that regulation is in line with how nature works. And as we're learning new things, they need to be learning new things, and regulation needs to be kept in line. So I'm saying collaboration is the way to go, and we need transparency and rigorous science, and it's not scientific to be defending a theory. If you've got a theory, or a hypothesis, you test it, and if the theory floats, great, you can run with it. But the moment there's a rebuttal of the theory or the hypothesis, well, then you revisit it and you test it again. And there's been a great development there. A renowned filmmaker, John D. Liu, some readers might have come across him. John D. Liu rose to prominence by covering the transformation of the Loess Plateau in China, how they took a totally desertified landscape and rebuilt the productivity. In this case, Chinese were using human energy, also permaculture principles and everything, but they rebuilt the productivity. And John D. Liu's suggesting that maybe we get research status or something, and that they can stay the cull of these donkeys, so we can actually throw a bit of rigorous third-party science behind what we say. I mean, I'm making these claims based on what I've seen. And, when I see dry erosion gullies becoming perennially flowing streams, and when I see that the damage of areas that aren't being managed, where wildfire damages areas that aren't being managed, or where there's high fuel loads, or where they're regulated, I'm saying, well, yeah, sure. It's observation, and science begins with observation. But, I don't have the academic credentials to challenge departments. So I'm saying, well, bring in the scientists. Let's have a look at this.
Right.
So that's where we are with the dolphins.
Are you making any ground on that? Are they open to doing that?
There are certain departments that are, but the biosecurity mob, they still see a biosecurity risk in these donkeys because they're a pest animal. After 8 years, I still haven't seen a single they haven't shown us any evidence where the actual biosecurity risk is, because that's the other thing. I mean, if regulators come down and enforce compliance, there still needs to be some learning there. I have learned nothing, and I don't. The only message that we're getting is don't innovate unless we tell you how to, and I don't think that's going to solve water woes in Northern Australia.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, no, we're trying. We're inviting our bureaucrats to join us as students of ecology.
Yeah, and hopefully that will happen. Get some researchers there to help validate what you're seeing with your eyes.
What we're seeing is relevant in the whole Mediterranean area, all these crisis areas, and that's, once again, I'm a Savory student in that respect as well. Poor land leads to poor people and ultimately conflict and violence. And if you look at some of these areas where there's a lot of conflict and violence, we look at the land, then you realize, hang on, these people have got nothing to lose. If we can create ecological foundations that support people, where people have ownership and skin in the game to look after these areas, well, then hopefully we can work towards a saner world. And sure, there's also other considerations, but just at the ecological level, and that's where we farmers are and grazers, there's enough groundwork for us to do, but we do need our city brethren to come on board and at least support us, and certainly not
close it down before you even get the opportunity or to validate it. Chris, I mentioned your cattle. I want to jump back to those feral cattle that you got in. You calmed them down. Can you describe what those look like? How big were they? What did the wild or living on their own, how did that affect their body conformation and size? What were you looking at?
Right. So the answer is it depends. In our area, they looked more like a racehorse. They were built more like a greyhound than a beast. And they were shiny in the wet season and just bony skeletons in the dry season. The donkeys were shiny all year round. No. Higher in other areas where we had more minerals in the soils, the wild cattle were actually like prize show cattle. Not in our area. Our cattle were nothing to be proud of, but they were descendants of the British Shorthorn that first came into the area of the pioneers 150 years ago, whenever it was. And then say they hadn't seen humans for generations. They'd been genetically isolated. So my line of thinking was, I won't be turning off any cattle in any rush. I'll keep the hybrid vigor up my sleeve for when I'm ready to turn cattle off. So let's just work with what's past the harsh selection of this landscape. So I was interested in maintaining that genetics, and then I actually discussed this. One of Alan Savory's early educators, Monty Bell, came here and visited, and I was talking about this. I said, what do I do to beef these animals up? And Monty said, don't worry. There's a rule in nature, form follows function. They've done this experiment all over the years, all over the planet. If you bring in new genetics, if you don't change your management, after a few generations, the animals are going to look exactly the same. Focus on the nutrition and your management, and you won't need your new genetics. So I found that was great. That took the pressure off me, and sure enough, so once I started having my little model areas, which started with a regen paddock where I've got something to grow, and I'd get these lawnmowers in every now and then to come and do the pruning and fertilizing and mulching. These animals then had the best of both worlds all of a sudden, and I started getting bigger animals, heavier, healthy animals. And then when I had enough country to actually start keeping any longer, we ended up, and they had to work for a living. We started getting smaller framed animals. So now what we have smaller framed animals. And just for anecdote, it took me 4 years to actually have a steer where the hindquarters weighed as much as the forequarters. I had to bury my stockman's ego very early in the piece.
Yes. So have you brought in any genetics? Or are you still working with those original genetics?
I'm working with originals, although there has been genetics. We were given a dairy calf so we could have some milk, and the dairy calf came in as a calf, and then before she obviously had to find a boyfriend in the area before she could give us milk. So there is a little bit of infusion of AFS, Australian Friesian Sowal cross, which was from a local dairy, which has since stopped operating. So there's a little bit of infusion there, and it's quite interesting there. Once again, the first cross, you had that hybrid, you had these huge animals, but once again, if they put to work, they just fall apart. So it's interesting. We in our country, in our context, we need a small, hardy animal, and that's what nature's selecting for. We're just helping. So I don't do any culling, not even for temperament, much to the disgust of my children, who had to sort of chase animals and find them out. Because I'm saying, I'll let nature do the culling, and it is interesting how they will cull within the herd as well. So it is really fascinating, and Zietzman says something similar. Johann Zietzman, where he says, body conditions everything. You either feed it into it or you breed it into it, and breeding is the long game. And I'm looking at building a multi-generational, hopefully, operation. So we're sticking with the genetics there and just trying to breed it into the animals. But yeah, nature does the selection, but there's an awful lot we can learn with the management side of it, and by just improving the nutrition.
If we looked at pictures of those first cows you brought in, or you started taming down and then starting your management, and you look at your cows now, you mentioned they got bigger and then they've gotten smaller again. Are they roughly the same size? Maybe some better conformation?
They're smaller. They're smaller and tidier.
Oh, they're smaller? Yeah.
And tidier. So the thing is, it's once again, the industry, the industry at large, they're looking at kilos per frame. And with feeding and genetics, you can work on kilos per frame. Whereas I'm saying is, it's easier to add the tonnage per hectare than kilos to the frame. And
yes,
and if you have more animals per hectare, even if they got less kilos, you're actually getting more fillets per hectare. You're getting more of the prime cuts per hectare, even though. So but anyway, once again, it's not, everybody's got to do their own sums, but situation's unique. But But certainly where we are at, where we're still rebuilding the capacity of the country, it's different. Once you've got, you're getting close to optimal carrying capacity, well, then you can indulge in all sorts of other ideas. But while we're still trying to build up the carrying capacity, production per hectare is what I'm after. And it doesn't only mean red meat. It doesn't even mean cattle. I mean, I want to see earthworms per hectare. I want to see bulk per hectare. I want to, and that is. So your conventional enterprise thinking is return on investment, but I don't think that's how nature works. Nature pays it forward, and my line of thinking is if we're trying to rebuild, if we can just increase the intake, right? The return on investment is looking at the inputs. If I can increase the intake, obviously I've got inputs. My own inputs are there, and I can keep an eye on those financially. But if I can increase the intake of solar energy and water and carbon, increase the intake, I'm going to have maybe an inefficient engine from the industry point of view, but it's going to be a much bigger engine. So it's focus on the intake rather than the inputs. Inputs come later, downstream. That's efficiency. But the effectiveness is intake. And where we are, we've just got to keep on looking at that at this stage.
I'd mentioned earlier about I'd heard A, B, and Z on a podcast. Another podcast I heard today, they were talking about, anytime we are producing something, it's because we've taken that energy and put it into it. And it related it to just like writing a book. That book is that outflow of energy. And you are storing energy as you do a little bit of riding every day. So you're doing something every day to get there for that large output at some point. And it's not only that, it's if you go work out every day. You're doing a little bit every day, and your large output at the end is you're in better shape, you're healthier, but it just doesn't happen overnight. That's very similar to what you're talking about when you're building that land. You're putting all that energy into it so that we get that final product we're looking for.
Yes, but understanding that nature actually wants to put that energy in anyway. So this is where, the increase in the intake, it's once again, this is where Elaine Ingham comes to mind, where she says, given the right conditions, there's nothing on the planet that can outperform bacteria. And they're at the bottom of our trophic level. So if we have certain conditions where growth is great, and so the wet season, so we've got to extend those conditions. But if we just focus on feeding bacteria, but then we know from science as well, we need the fungi as well. So if we just focus on feeding bacteria and fungi, those bottom levels. So for the fungi, we need carbon. So dead grass, senescent grass, or dead wood, that's fungal food. So and sunshine and carbon for the bacteria, the sugars. So we jacking up bacterial fungal populations, and it's the way we move our herds, where we then come and we slice and dice the fungi, and then create more bacterial food. Then we back off, and the fungal can regrow again. So it's reversing the process of excessive slash and burn agriculture. Whereas slash and burn agriculture, you've got fungal domination, and you slash and burn, and you have the 1-to-1, which is ideal for row crops and pasture, and then you mine for our production. We're still mining, but we're extracting, we're not mining. We are actually building up, we bootstrapping our way back up, alternatively feeding fungi and bacteria, and then letting nature do the rest. And as long as we don't have chemical contaminants or concentrations that will destroy that, nature will do that. It's a lot harder. I suspect it's a lot harder in areas that have had a history of previous extraction, where you have had drenches and chemicals and whatever. There you might have to go with soil inoculants and whatever. But at the end of the day, the main process is nature wants to self-heal. It's one of our local guys. He says, just take your foot off nature's throat. She can show you what she can do.
Yes, yeah.
Very often we slide into situations where there's a given dynamic, and we just sort of continue with it. It's very often we focus on what we're doing. It's what we're not doing sometimes is probably the area we've got to look at more than what we're doing.
Yeah, we just need, in a lot of ways, get out of the way of nature.
I think I'm not sure about your situations. Where you have severe winters and extended periods of no growth. It's probably different. There's similar, same principles, but they apply differently.
Right.
You've got a production and a storage and ration out approach, well, nature has. Whereas as our economy is more symbiotic, things have to happen all the time. So the position I'm in is where I'm trying to fatten a thoroughbred. I'm saying I've got a high metabolic rate. Nature moves very fast, and she doesn't really build reserves. And I'm saying as well, in a symbiotic situation, can I build reserves? Whereas you've got permaculture, you've got people like Joel Salatin or Sepp Helser in Europe, where they are actually bringing in symbiosis into the Northern European or Northern Hemisphere economy, where you build, accumulate, and ration out, but bring in symbiosis. So they're boosting productivity by bringing in symbiosis, and I'm trying to boost productivity by bringing in storage and trying to build those accounts that I can't see, like under the ground and that.
On that, let's talk practical for just a little bit on managing your livestock. What's that look like with what you're doing? Are you stringing out electric fence, or how are you getting your high density?
I started off with a few permanent fences, which I've all changed around in the meantime, but I have a few wire fences, and then I use temporary electric fence off the sides. And the density, the highest density is when I first treat country. Like when I first treat country, it's that initial treatment where I try and apply somewhere between 1,200 head per hectare. So I'm doing up to 7 shifts a day that first time.
Oh, okay.
Then I back off. And the reason why there's a practical consideration there is if I only do 3 shifts a day, the dominant animals will put on weight and the tail dies on me. Whereas if I have more than 3 shifts a day, well, at some stage the dominant animals have to go back to water, and the tail of the herd can balance their nutrition. I'm talking on country where there's not much good stuff. So everybody needs to have part of it. So there's a practical consideration there. And the reason why you want these very high densities is because you literally want every square foot massaged with hooves and all your litter put down and dung and urine. So at a cellular level, at a micro level environment, you're creating edge effect, and then you take them off, and you don't bring them back till you've had at least 2 inches of rain in another 6 weeks for things to happen. And so the electric fence, the fencing in my situation, and it's probably going to be very different in your climates, but in my situation, the fences are there simply because I can't afford the sort of staff that I want. Ideally, I'd want people on horseback with these animals all the time and moving them around as a herd, just simulating the migrations. But what I've noticed, because I've had to work with these fences and for convenience sake, well, you can't move around at night. Well, you lock them up in tight concentration somewhere at night. You either use that to knock some area flat, or you use it to bring nutrients to an area which otherwise they wouldn't go to. By yarding them up every night at high concentration, they become comfortable with that. Now, you and I probably don't like being jammed up in high concentration. Now, we don't jam up either, but what I'm saying is we like our space.
Right.
Whereas for herd animals, unless, as Bud Williams says, unless they're bumping into each other, they don't have a problem being close together. So I'm awakening dormant instincts where they actually feel comfortable as a herd. And by doing that on a regular basis, all of a sudden they come in at night on their own and they feel comfortable. And when I put them into a bigger paddock, they'll move around in that bigger paddock now. This is 30 years later. They'll move around at high concentrations, even in a bigger paddock. So it's reawakening dormant instincts, which the industry's bred out of them. Is I think so that's where Fred Provenza's stuff comes in. The behavior stuff. That's a whole area that we haven't had a look at, and that's where I think with our fencing we've got to be very careful that we don't block our progress by not allowing to learn about the behavioral opportunities that are there, and that's where I'm a skeptic with the virtual fencing. I'm saying it's a great idea and it's a great tool to have in the toolbox, but I sense an incredible danger there that if we're not there learning with the animals, that all of a sudden the virtual fencing just becomes a proxy for our existing fencing. As Bud Williams says, it's because we don't understand the animals. We're making them do things that's convenient for us. Whereas if you get that herd mentality right, they can work as a herd, and it needs very little reinforcing. And Fred Provenza's work seems to support that.
And that reminds me of the migratory herding reboot that Bob Kinford talks about in getting them to do that. Do you find, and I think what you're saying is that pinning them up every night was instrumental in helping them get comfortable with that tight herd bond. And it aided them in their daily grazing. They stayed closer together.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So obviously when I'm grazing, I'm also using high densities, but not quite as, not like they are when they yard it up at night. But it's the other opportunity is if you've got stockmen. I mean, in the middle of the day, you can when they're chewing their cud, there's 2-3 hours there where you can put them somewhere. So something that I tell people in the industry is we mustn't forget animals don't put on weight when they're feeding or walking to and from water. They put on weight while they're lying there chewing their cud or sleeping. So that time when they're feeding or walking to and from water, that's animal energy that we can harness for our own agendas. We can use that energy. So that's the power that herd has, whether it's a small herd or a large herd. Most people wouldn't have hundreds of thousands of head of cattle. Most people would just have a few dozen.
Right.
And I think a lot of my work has been based on that, because Alan Savory talks about, the huge herds, and there's a lot of happening there within Zeetzmans and O'Neills and that. But what I'm saying is the reality is most ranchers have only got half a dozen or a few dozen. So I've been particularly mindful of that and say, well, what can you do with those? And my observation is it's just like a small tractor. Sure, we all know we could do more with a bulldozer, but we haven't got that bulldozer. How do we put that small tractor to work? What implements can we use? And say that the implement that we use is high density or is animal density and animal behavior. So I think it's people should not be discouraged simply because they haven't got the huge herds. However, if as a region people can start working together on the bigger picture, sure, put the big herds together. A dozer can do more than a tractor, but certainly people shouldn't be discouraged simply because they haven't got the animal numbers that are very often talked about in forums like holistic management and that.
Right. So you can do this on a smaller scale with a few head of cattle. You're just adjusting your space and for your management.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where electric fencing is very handy. Certainly to train up the animals. Also, when you were doing weaner training, it depends what situation you're in. Like in the industry, it's very often, they want to educate weaners because it's easier down the track, or young heifers or whatever. If they can't keep them in the herd, well, train them. But use that animal impact, use that opportunity of training the animals to actually get them to work as well. So rather than be subsidized.
Well, I will admit I have not done that. It's a very interesting idea that I'll have to reflect how I can do that. And like you said, we like to do things with our weaned calves because we feel like, we typically have them close and we can do some things with them. So I have to consider what we can do based upon what you've said. But I want to jump to virtual fencing for just a moment. Earlier you mentioned that you have some concerns about it. And it sounds like to me your concerns comes from a place that we will not be students observing our cattle because we're looking at a phone screen or a computer to move them, and you're not spending time with them. Would that be a correct assessment, or do I have that a little bit wrong?
No, that's the fear that I have, is that we may shortchange ourselves. So for example, I would, and the other thing is, what I'd like to be doing is I'd be like to have virtual fencing on my leader animals. And I mean, so I'm saying this discussion needs to be had by by stockmen, not only by ranchers, people who actually understand the animal behavior, not only people who own stock or people who want to sell stock, manage from the office. So yeah, there's a lot of trial happening at the moment, but the trialing's happening by those people who can afford it, and they generally seem to be the big operators, and already have a market and have an operation. So it's just ease of operation. But what I'm saying is, if it's a tool that should be used for landscape rehabilitation, and I'm not sure where the technology is. It's quite possible that you can have your leader animals carry something, and then have the other animals stay within a certain distance of them. So when they move, they take them with them. I don't know. But another one that we do that obviously I don't know anything about, and I'm certainly going to watch, and that is any reports about whether the radiation from these devices will actually have impacts. I don't know. I think it's something we need to be aware of. It's just the same with our mobile devices. And we've got Wi-Fi here. I turn the Wi-Fi off at night. I just noticed, I might be wrong, but I noticed that our microbats seem to be affected. Are we affecting other animals? So the side effects or byproducts or unintended consequences of any new technology need to be looked at. And once again, I'm not saying, I agree with Savory. Every tool needs to be in the toolbox. You don't throw a tool out just because you can't use it or you don't believe in it. Have it there. But we need to understand these tools better and understand where can we hybridize them, where the danger areas.
Yeah.
So with virtual fencing, there's some great opportunities, and there's some opportunities to move forward very fast. And once again, it's just like employing a dozer. Sure, it's a very invasive activity, but it can be justified at times. So,
right.
But when it's done its job, you take the dozer away, and it's quite possible that electric fencing, that virtual fencing, once again, you use it for a while, but then you get rid of it, or you go to the next step. So, yeah, fascinating technology, and I hope to know more about it and learn more about it. But I certainly encourage everybody who's doing it to keep their eyes wide open and look for unintended consequences, good or bad.
Right. I say this quite often, but we don't know what we don't know. And this is new technology to see what happens with it. I'm excited for it. I wish I had the extra money to go get it and try it out, but I'm not there right now. But I'm excited to see where it goes. But at the same time, we need to go into it with our eyes wide open.
Yes.
Yeah. Chris, before we get to the famous 4 questions, is there anything else you'd like to cover that we didn't dive into at all or cover deeply enough?
I couldn't emphasize enough what you've just said there a moment ago, and that is we don't know what we don't know. And there's so much, and having that caution allows us to move forward with curiosity. And we need to have that curiosity. That curiosity needs to fuel our learning and our science. And we need to have the humility to understand that even if we have a breakthrough, there's still more to learn. And the encouraging thing that I've seen is there are self-regulating patterns. Nature has this ability to self-regulate. Let's find out more. There are so many things that I'm doing now that I started doing for a different reason, and all of a sudden I realized, hang on, this makes sense for all these other reasons. So the original reasons are no longer relevant.
Yeah. Well, Chris, it is time for our famous 4 questions. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question, what's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Holistic Management with Alan Savory, new framework for making Alan Savory's, that has to be my main one. Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, The Gardeners of Eden. I've not read that book.
By Dan Daggett.
Yes. I think I've seen it, but I haven't read it. So excellent resource you mentioned earlier in holistic management. Yes.
It's a sort of book that you can give to people who aren't really in the industry, who are interested, but anybody can read it. It's good for us. We can use it as a marketing tool, to get people enthusiastic about what we're doing.
Oh, yes. Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the ranch?
High animal impact, managed high animal impact has to be because the beauty about that tool is it can become self-regulating. So I'm a lazy African. You put in the hard work, and then afterwards it self-regulates. So it's not like a tractor you've got to keep on, like as we talk here, I've got animals out there applying high animal impact. because they
doing the work for you. Yeah,
yes.
very good. What would you tell someone just getting started?
Someone just getting started, I say, find the closest regenerative farmer in your area and join him on his learning curve, or her.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Find a mentor. Go help them. See.
I find mentors anyway, but I'm just saying is from a practical. The mentors allow you to sort of look at the Z. You know, they help you define your Z, whereas finding the C, D, and E, do that together with the guy on the ground closest to you. They may have only just been doing it for 2 years or only just starting.
Oh, yeah.
Go in there on the ground floor. And if you've got a Joel Salatin close by, well, of course, but not everybody has that.
Right. So no matter where they are on their journey, join them and you all can continue on that journey together, and two heads are better than one.
Yeah.
And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
On our website, kachanastation.com. That's the easier, the user-friendly one. And we've got a presence on Facebook, and we've got the older website, kachana.com, where all our early work's documented as well. So that's also a resource.
Well, Chris, really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Well, Cal, thank you. And it's just good to know that that not only is the family growing, there's family that I hadn't met before.
If today's episode got you thinking differently about your operation, about your asset base, your sunlight, and what your land can sustainably produce, then you're on the right track. If you know someone else who's working to rebuild their land and their operation, share this episode with them. Thank you for listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast. More grass, better soil, happier livestock. And until next time, keep on grazing.